There's a sound Jerry Lee Lewis makes on the piano that feels like a warning, not a note, a hit, the kind that makes the instrument flinch like it knows what's coming next. And for decades, that sound has been sold to us as freedom, chaos, rock and roll with no rules, the wild man who couldn't be contained. But here's the part that never plays in the highlight reels. Before the myth, there was paperwork, a document, a date, a number somebody tried to blur. And the thing about a document is, no matter how many biographies you write, no matter how many documentaries you cut, no matter how many times you soften it into controversy, December 12th, 1957, hold on to that. Because everything that happens next, London, the headlines, the cancellations, the comeback, happens because people tried to outrun a date that wouldn't budge. I'm Natasha. This is the Vinyl Vault. And I need to admit something before we go any further. I've seen this headline for years, and I let it sit in the background like a weird rock and roll footnote. I've nodded along to the folklore version. I've let the wild label do the work for me until I actually sat down and lined up the timeline. And once you look at the timeline, you realize this isn't just a scandal story. It's a system story. So tonight we're doing three things, clean and simple. We're walking through the document that made it real, the airport moment that blew it open, and the quiet American protection that kept the show moving anyway. Not because people didn't know, but because enough people decided the show mattered more than the truth. Because the disturbing part isn't only what Jerry Lee Lewis did, it's how many adults, in how many places, decided it should be survivable. December 12th, 1957. Hernando, Mississippi. Jerry Lee Lewis is 22 years old. He marries Myra Gale Brown. She is 13. Not young, not teen, 13. She won't turn 14 until the following July, and the marriage license lists her age as 15. That detail matters because it tells you something immediately. The truth didn't just get hidden, it got managed. Myra is also related to him, often described as his first cousin once removed. She's the daughter of J.W. Brown, the bassist in Jerry Lee's band, which means this isn't some anonymous distance. This is close. This is inside the circle. And the ceremony is small, quiet, no big press moment, no cameras staged outside a church, no announcement designed for fans, just a piece of paper signed in a town that wasn't trying to become a headline. And I want you to feel how early this is in the legend. This isn't late career collapse. This isn't a washed up star spiraling in the dark. This is the moment the machine is still climbing. So when people ask, how does something like that happen? Part of the answer isn't complicated. It happens when someone profitable doesn't get told no. Because by the end of 1957, Jerry Lee Lewis isn't a niche act. He's explosive. He's already whole lot of shaking going on. He's already television appearances. He's already screaming crowds and promoters who can't book him fast enough. He's already the kind of artist where the room changes temperature when he walks on stage. And Sun Records, his label, is building a business on that heat. Promoters are booking him because crowds show up. Radio programmers are playing him because listeners keep calling. Every link in the chain is making money when Jerry Lee walks out and starts pounding keys. Weeks after that marriage, he records Great Balls of Fire, a song that becomes a permanent piece of American sound. So now the timeline has two tracks running at the same time. On stage, legend. Off stage, a document with a date that never moves. December 12th, 1957. For a while, it stays quiet. And silence isn't an accident when you're a rising star. Silence is a strategy. Touring continues. Records keep moving. Bookings keep coming. The machine keeps feeding itself. And if you don't turn the light on, the room stays dark. That's how it works. Then comes May of 1958, and Jerry Lee gets what every American rock and roll act wants: A British tour, 28 shows, a big moment, a crown being placed in a new country. The UK is hungry for American rock. Elvis is in the army. The landscape is shifting. And Jerry Lee is positioned as the next unstoppable thing. And this is where the story becomes a movie scene. Because the explosion doesn't happen on stage, it happens at the airport. May 1958, London Airport, arrivals, flashbulbs, not the soft kind, the aggressive kind. Reporters leaned forward. Not fans, press. Jerry Lee steps off the plane with his band, his manager, and his wife. Myra is still 13, and British journalists do what they're famous for. They ask questions. Who's traveling with you? My wife. How old is she? He gives an age that doesn't match reality. How long have you been married? He gives a timeline that doesn't match the paper. And those answers don't survive follow-up. Because the British press didn't treat rock stars like sacred cows. They treated them like targets. And a target with a loose thread is going to get pulled. Within hours, the story starts surfacing in pieces. The age doesn't match. The marriage timing doesn't match. And then the relationship detail lands with a different kind of weight. She's not just young, she's family. The next morning, British tabloids are running variations of the same headline. Rock and roll star, married, girl, 13. And suddenly, what could be quietly managed back home becomes impossible to soften. Broadcast opportunities get pulled. Venues start canceling. The BBC doesn't want the association. Theater owners don't want the protest outside their doors. People don't want the moral stain on their building. And that 28-show tour collapses almost immediately. Not after a slow decline, not after months of debate, after a handful of nights. The shape of it is brutal. Airport questions, a lie, headlines, cancellations, a plane home. Now, here's the part people often get wrong. They tell this story like the scandal ended him, like the outrage worked, like the system corrected itself. It didn't, because when Jerry Lee lands back in America, the response is uneven. Some radio stations drop him, some venues cancel, some doors close in the bigger, cleaner national lanes. The mainstream pop machine doesn't want the stain too close to it, but not all doors close. And that's where the protection becomes visible. Because the industry isn't one conscience. It's a chain of people making decisions. Promoters, venue owners, managers, label people, radio programmers, press handlers, distributors, people who don't ask, is this right? They ask, does this sell? And in places where Jerry Lee still sold tickets, markets less influenced by British tabloid outrage, markets already inclined to forgive, markets that just wanted the show, bookings continued. Why? Because outrage is expensive and forgiveness is profitable. So the machine adapts, it goes quiet in certain lanes, it leans harder into others, it keeps the product moving. And that's the true spine of this story. This isn't a scandal that ended a career. This is a scandal that should have ended a career, but didn't, because enough adults decided the money was worth more than the girl. The system didn't protect Myra. The system protected Jerry Lee Lewis, and it didn't protect him by making the truth disappear. It protected him by making it debatable. Watch how the narrative shifts after London. You start seeing the same moves over and over. The age gets fuzzier. The timeline gets shorter. The language gets softer. Sometimes you'll hear an implication that she was older than she was. Sometimes it becomes, it was legal. Sometimes it becomes, people didn't understand where we were from. And I want to be very clear here. Legality and morality are not the same thing. But legal is a magic word inside PR, because it turns a moral line into a technical argument. And technical arguments can be managed. They can be debated. They can be delayed. They can be used to keep a revenue stream alive. This is what people miss when they reduce it to rock and roll controversy. The controversy isn't the point. The management is. Because even after the truth becomes public, the machine is still trying to outrun it by turning it into a conversation instead of a stop sign. And the wild man persona helps with that. Because if you read the histories, watch the documentaries, scroll the highlight reels, Jerry Lee is almost always framed the same way. Untamed, rebellious, a force of nature, too chaotic for anyone to control. And sure, his performances were raw. He wasn't polished. He didn't behave like a safe pop product. But the wildness label does something convenient. It turns harm into personality. It turns predatory behavior into scandal. It turns consequences into folklore. Because if he's just wild, then nobody has to talk about systems. Nobody has to talk about adults who signed, booked, sold, photographed, defended, and kept going. Wild becomes a mask the machine can hide behind. But what happened in 1957 isn't wild. It isn't quirky. It isn't a footnote. It's power being used on someone who had none. And power doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with permission. And that's why I want to bring in the only voice that truly matters here, Myra's, as an adult looking back. Because if you strip away the myth, you remember there's an actual person in the center of this. Not a headline, not a plot point. A person who had to grow up inside a story the world kept telling about someone else. In interviews later in life, Myra described the relationship in ways that don't sound like folklore. Not, we were a great love story and people judged us. More like, this was heavy, this shaped me. This wasn't a cute rock legend. There's a line attributed to her that's been repeated because it's so stark, about feeling like she was the adult and he was the child, about caretaking, responsibility, emotional pressure, and I'm not going to turn her into a quote machine. I'm not going to make her the prop that makes the episode feel serious. I'm just going to say this. When a story gets told for decades as a legend, the person who lived inside it often becomes invisible. And the industry benefits from that invisibility. Because the less you see her, the easier it is to keep hearing the song without hearing the context. And then time passes, and the machine does what it always does with time. It rebrands. By the late 1960s, Jerry Lee pivots into country music. A new lane, a new audience, a new set of gatekeepers who either don't know the full story or know it and have decided it's background noise. In that lane, the London story becomes something you mention in one sentence, if at all, a hurdle, a controversy, something he survived. And that word is the final rewrite, survived, because it frames him as the victim of the story, the wounded hero who overcame scandal, while the child remains what she always was to the machine, collateral. This is why the date matters, because the date doesn't move, but the narrative tries to, and it keeps trying to. In 1989, a biopic comes out. Great balls of fire, big actors, big scenes, big music. And biopics have a special talent. They can take something disturbing and give it prettier lighting. They can turn alarm into romance. They can make an audience feel sympathy where they should feel a hard stop. They can turn a power imbalance into a doomed love story. And once something becomes a movie, it becomes memory, not history. Memory. That's how myths survive, not by lying outright, by reshooting the story until it looks like something we can live with. Jerry Lee Lewis died in 2022. Obituaries called him a pioneer, a legend, an architect of rock and roll. Some mentioned Myra in a paragraph, some softened details. Some treated it like an early career storm he wrote out. And that's what keeps me stuck on this story, not just that it happened, but that the story got rewritten so many times by so many people that the truth became optional. Airport questions, a date, a lie, then decades of smoothing. So here's what changes when you actually hold the timeline in your hands. When you hear Great Balls of Fire and you feel that piano hit like electricity, you can still admire the performance. You can still acknowledge what he did musically, but you can't pretend the legend is clean. You can't unsee the paperwork. You can't unknow that adults protected the star, not the child. And maybe that discomfort feels like it ruins the music. But I don't think the problem is discomfort. I think the problem is what we've been trained to do with it. We've been trained to file it under rock and roll being rock and roll. We've been trained to call it wild. We've been trained to treat the worst part as a footnote. And that training came from somewhere. Gatekeepers, money, schedules, silence, selective morality, the machine. The date doesn't move. December 12th, 1957. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. If this made you uncomfortable, you're not alone. But I'd rather we sit in the discomfort than let the machine rewrite it into folklore again. Tell me where you land on it, not on the man, on the system. I'm Natasha. This is the Vinyl Vault. I'll see you in the next one.